Good morning again, friends. The last couple of weeks we have been looking at the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which has been particularly inspiring for me because, as I think I already mentioned, it is one of my favorite chapters in this entire scripture. This week we are going to continue on that wave, but I'm going to move on to the next chapter, the 13th chapter of the Gita. I'm going to read the second verse of the 13th chapter. The chapter itself, the 13th chapter, has two primary concepts that Krishna is explaining to Arjuna, and I think we will look at one today and one next week. And like I said, we are going to keep that same momentum, but there's a shift in the mood or the energy of this conversation of the Bhagavad Gita as we move from 12th to 13th, and we will see what I'm referring to. First, I'll read the verse. I'm going to read the second verse of chapter 13 of the Gita. This is Krishna speaking to Arjuna, and this is how the Sanskrit verse sounds. Idam shariram kaunteya kshetra mityabhidhiyate etadhyo veti tam prahuhu kshetragya iti tadvidaha. And I'm going to read the English translation as written by Swami Kriyananda. I think I'm going to read the first verse of 13th chapter first. Now that I think about it, it's important to read that one before I go to the second verse. Because the first verse is Arjuna asking a question. Again, if you remember, the 12th chapter also started with Arjuna asking a question to Krishna, which is, what is the most effective way to practice yoga? Is it by developing personal devotion to the divine, or is it by relating to the divine in abstract? And Krishna gives a very categorical answer. For manifested beings, devotion is the key. And in this particular chapter, this is the question that Arjuna asks that prompts this conversation. Arjuna says to Krishna, O Keshava, I long to know the mystery of Prakriti and Purusha, which is the intelligent mother nature and the transcendent God, and of kshetra and kshetragya, of the knowledge and its object. So this is the question that Arjuna is proposing to Krishna. He's very straightforward. I just want to know two things. I want to know the nature of Prakriti and Purusha, of kshetra and kshetragya. And Krishna actually starts from the second part of the question. I don't know why. And that's what we are going to look at today. So this is how the second verse of the 13th chapter goes. Or is it the first verse? I'm not sure. I'll read Krishna's response to it. O son of Kunti, Arjuna, those who know the truth perceive this human body as kshetra, or the field where good and evil karma are reaped, and the knower of the field, the soul, as kshetragya. So this entire first part of the conversation is hinged on these two words, and that's what we are going to discuss today. These two words, kshetra and kshetragya. And these are interesting words that I was thinking about yesterday and today, and they're not as straightforward to translate into English as oftentimes esoteric concepts tend to be. And I'm going to do my best, and Krishna obviously does a great job of explaining what these concepts are. But I'm saying literally to just give one English word that is the equivalent of these two words is a little difficult. The word kshetra itself literally means a place, a location, a field. That's what that means. It's just a playground. It's a field that in itself is not defining what's happening there. That's what the word kshetra means. And kshetragya means one who perceives, one who knows, one who's aware of, one who's overseeing this field. So there are these two concepts, kshetra and kshetragya, the object itself and the knower of the object, the field itself and the one who perceives the field. And this is the concept that Krishna is explaining. And this, personally, I think of as one of the most important verses and important concepts in the entire Bhagavad Gita, because you may not remember this because this is related to the Sanskrit verses, but it ties the entire conversation of the Bhagavad Gita back to the very first verse where it all began. If you remember, the beginning of the Gita, the very first verse of this entire scripture is this question that Dhritarashtra, the blind mind, is asking to Sanjaya, who's representing the faculty of introspection. And the question he asks in Sanskrit language is, this is how it goes, Kurukshetre dharma kshetre samaveta yuyutsavaha mamakaha pandavash chaiva kim akurvata Sanjaya. Now what that means is, in the field of Kurukshetra, in the field of Dharma, when my children, this is Dhritarashtra speaking, my children, the Kauravas, met with the Pandavas, what happened, Sanjaya, can you tell me? There's a lot to unpack in that verse, which I did in the very first episode of this web series, which you can catch up on. But the reason I quote that verse right now is the entire scripture of the Bhagavad Gita starts with these two words, Kurukshetre Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetra Dharma Kshetra. And after 12 chapters, Krishna is actually explaining to Arjuna what those words mean. Kurukshetra, again, many of you may have heard this word. It's a very familiar place in India. It is actually a literal place where the war of Mahabharata is said to have happened. And Kurukshetra is referring to this battlefield where this war is happening. And this whole conversation, metaphorically, is happening in the middle of the battle, although Swami Kriyananda says it's unlikely that they are actually standing in between the two armies having this detailed philosophical discourse. But metaphorically, it is happening between the two armies, between the Pandavas and Kauravas. The chariot that Krishna is driving is placed there, and Arjuna is asking these questions, and Krishna is explaining these concepts to Arjuna. That's where the Bhagavad Gita is happening. Now, Dhritarashtra asks, what happened in the field of Kurukshetra? What happened in this field of Dharma? That's how this whole scripture begins. Now, the word Kurukshetra itself is an interesting word. Kuru is actually an ancient ancestor of this whole clan of Pandavas and Kauravas. He's many generations before the king Shantanu. The Mahabharata story itself starts, for the most part, from the life of King Shantanu, and King Shantanu is the father of Bhishma, and Bhishma has two brothers. He sort of becomes a proxy father for these two other brothers, Dhritarashtra and Pandu, and Dhritarashtra and Pandu are the children of the Pandavas, they are the fathers of the Pandavas and the Kauravas who are actually meeting on the battlefield. Now, in a way, Shantanu is not in a way, he is the great-grandfather of the Pandavas and the Kauravas. And the story of the Mahabharata, for the most part, starts from the story and the life of Shantanu. But Kuru is an ancestor that comes much before that. And Kurukshetra, the field of the ancestors, what we are talking about, what we are referring to by this field is the field of consciousness. Later on in the same chapter, a few verses down the line, Krishna is going to give a much more detailed explanation of what kshetra means. But what it is referring to is this field, and Krishna is making it very clear. This field, Arjuna, that we are talking about is not out there, it's in here. And that's what he's going to explain. He's going to make it clear that this is not just a battle that is happening outside, that all the symbolism that we have been unpacking here for these last 30 or 40 weeks of this discussion is not mere imagination. It's not a stretch. This is actually literally stated by Krishna in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, the kshetra is actually you. It is your body, your mind, your own consciousness. And that's where all of this is happening. And this word Kurukshetra, as I was starting to say, it is the field of Kuru. It is the field of ancestors. And what it's referring to is this, everything that we are referring to as kshetra, the body and mind, they're all inherited. They come from ancestry, they come from past, they come from the ancestors from this one birth, which is this body is given through the DNA, and all the materials that make up our physical body come from 7 generations of ancestors. But also it comes from our own ancestry, our own past, all our past incarnations, whether it is in association with these particular set of ancestors or not. The karma, the momentum that we have built is from the past. So this kshetra, where this battle is happening, is created from the past. It is a remnant. It is an extension of everything that has happened. And this battle is obviously happening between two forces, the forces of aspiration and the forces of delusion. That which we are drawn toward, that which is moving us forward, and all those things, the desires and attachments, that's essentially the force of delusion that is pulling us downward, that is drawing our energy down in the spine. So this battle between these two forces is happening in this field, in this kshetra. I want to read a verse from chapter 13, I think. Let's see. I think it's verse 5. Yes, that's right. It's verse 5 and 6. And I'm going to read just the English translation of this verse as Krishna is explaining what the meaning of the word kshetra means. this is Krishna speaking, succinctly stated, the kshetras are composed of undifferentiated and differentiated nature. Their differentiated nature being the gross elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the 10 senses, which are the 5 organs of knowledge, ear, skin, eyes, nose, and tongue, and the 5 objects of the senses, hearing, feeling, sight, smell, and taste. The 5 organs of action, hands, feet, mouth, anus, and the generative organs. The one sense-conscious mind, the intellect, ego consciousness, the distortions of chitta caused by attraction, aversion, pleasure, and pain, the body itself, consciousness, and persistence. So that is the definition of kshetra as literally stated by Krishna. Essentially, it is all that which we identify as. It is all aspects of consciousness that have that ego identity, from all the sense objects, the sense organs, the organs of action, the 5 elements. The 5 elements he's talking about are not just the gross physical elements that create the physical structure for the body, but they're actually referring to the flows of energy in our own subtle spine, which we have already looked at. The 5 elements are referring to the 5 vibrations of energy in the chakras. And the intellect, the sense-conscious mind, the distorted chitta, and the body, and all of this, Krishna is saying, is the kshetra. The field that we are talking about, the Kurukshetra that we are talking about, is all of these elements that have any tinge of self-identity, self with a small s, which is the ego-identified self. So everything that is ego-identified is part of the kshetra. And then, what is kshetragya then? Kshetragya is the overseer, is the soul itself. It is what is most elegantly in English expressed as the witness consciousness. In the next verse of chapter 13, Krishna explains this. Know me, talking about Krishna himself, know me also as Bharata, know me also as the silent knower in all kshetras evolved out of the cosmic creative principle. I consider true wisdom to be the understanding of kshetra, the field, and its relationship to kshetragya, the perceiver of the field. So Krishna here is saying, I am the kshetragya. I am that perceiver of all creative principles in nature across all different kshetras. Whereas Arjuna, or us, the individual, the seeker, the devotee, is that perceiver within the kshetra of his own ego identity. Whereas God is the overseer of everything, the devotee, the individual soul, is the overseer of that which the soul has identified with. And Krishna goes on to say, I consider true wisdom. What is true wisdom? The understanding of kshetra and its relationship to the kshetragya. This relationship between the field itself and the perceiver of the field, the soul and everything else that we looked at that is ego-identified, understanding of this relationship, Krishna is explaining to Arjuna, is true wisdom. There is this hymn to the Guru that we often sing. It's a traditional one that Yogananda ji translated. I'm not sure if Yogananda ji translated it into English or whether it was somebody else. It's a very common Indian chant that is chanted across many traditions, but certainly one that Yogananda ji chanted and we do also. It starts with these words, Brahmanandam Paramasukhadam. It's an ancient Sanskrit verse from the scriptures. There is a verse, the third line of that chant goes like this in Sanskrit, Ekam Nityam Vimalam Achalam Sarvadi Sakshi Bhutam. And in English it is translated as, permanent, unmoving, the everlasting. He is pure, permanent, unmoving, the everlasting seer of all. It's not exactly literally word to word, but it is actually a perfect translation of what the verse is trying to say. And that, in essence, is the concept that we are discussing here, permanent, unmoving. Because all these things that we defined as the kshetra are things that are constantly in flux. The sense organs, the sense objects, the organs of action, the mind, the ego, the distorted feeling nature, all of these are constantly in flux. And the physical body, which is constantly in flux, constantly growing and evolving. And the true identity of the Guru, of that Guru principle that is within us, is with that which is permanent and unmoving. And the word that comes after that is my most favorite of all, the everlasting seer of all. I did not quite know what the word seer meant. I just looked it up actually right before I started speaking. I think there are many connotations and ways in which that word is interpreted. Seer is often seen as somebody who's wise, who can see the future. But quite literally, the word S-E-E-R, seer, is the one who sees. He is the one who's witnessing. The Guru consciousness, the pure intuition that is in us, the oversoul that is guiding the trajectory of our own life, that aspect of us, that aspect of our consciousness is kshetragya. And that aspect only sees, the everlasting seer of all. That aspect of us is seeing everything that is happening. It does not participate. The kshetra, on the other hand, is not even participant, because it is interesting how these concepts are presented in the Gita, because the field is almost presented as something inanimate. I'm looking for a better word, I'm not sure. It's presented as something inert, as if it does not have any inherent reality of its own. And it's important for us to understand, because we, as we move through life, we identify with the field, whereas the field in itself is not one animate entity. It is not this one person. Of course, ego awareness and ego consciousness is an important player in that field, but the field is consisting of so many mental citizens, and that is the essence of this inner battle, because depending upon where we are at, we are constantly shifting our identity with these different mental citizens, and they are all sided on these two sides of the battle, either on the Pandava side or the Kaurava side. And the field itself does not have any inherent reality of its own. That's why Dhritarashtra says, Kurukshetra, Dharma Kshetra. This is the field where dharma is determined, where the fruits of the evil and good of the past are finally reaped. That's all is happening here. There is no inherent intelligence in the field itself. The intelligence comes from kshetragya, the overseer of the field. And the individuals in the field are not inanimate. Inanimate is not the right word, I take that back. But they are not intelligent in that way of being completely self-aware and self-driven, because they are driven from the past. All these mental citizens that are playing in this field of Kurukshetra, whether it's the Pandava warriors or Kaurava warriors, they are driven, they are impelled because of their own nature. And who's the one overseeing? In the story itself, it is Krishna, who's the kshetragya, who's overseeing all of this. And it is the oversoul that is within us, that essence of who we are in our own soul. That is what is overseeing and perceiving all of this without actually participating. No matter what we go through in our lives, there's a part of us that is untouched. Again, that's why in the second chapter of the Gita, Krishna says, as if, to make the point clear, there's so many verses where Krishna goes on and on speaking to Arjuna. Arjuna, the soul does not die, the soul is not born, the soul does not get wet with water, it cannot be burned with fire, it cannot be attacked with weapons. Why? Because the soul is not on the field. The soul is not playing the game. The soul is not part of the battle. The soul is the witness consciousness. It is the everlasting seer of all. There is this beautiful conversation in the autobiography of a yogi when Yoganandaji first meets Anandamoyi Ma, the great woman saint who lived in India. And Yoganandaji asks Anandamoyi Ma, can you tell me about your life a little bit more? I know you as the soul that you are, but just so others can hear, whoever is with Yogananda, can you tell me more about your early life and who you are and your work? And then there is this very famous answer that Anandamoyi Ma gives. I actually copied it so I can read it again today. This is what she says. Before I came to this earth, Father, I was the same. As a little girl, I was the same. I grew into womanhood, but still I was the same. When the family in which I had been born made arrangements to have this body married, I was the same. And when passion drunk, my husband came to me and murmured endearing words, lightly touching my body, he received a violent shock as if struck by lightning. For even then, I was the same. She goes on and that is the state of consciousness that we are all aspiring towards. What is it that is the same? It is even worth meditating on. That is the entire teaching of Ramana Maharishi, this meditation on the question of who am I? What is same? Of course, there's a lot of things that are not the same. She was a baby that was tiny. She didn't have language. She didn't know how to feed herself. And then she became a small girl who was interested in playing and who was engaging with the world, but still did not know how to take care of herself. And then she became a woman. She went through puberty. She attained womanhood, and then her body changed. And then she was relating to the world differently. And then she got married, and then she had a spouse. Of course, she did not go through this journey as many of us would in this normal human plane, but still, she was also mutating. Her body and her existence was constantly fluid. So what was it that was the same? Of course, we use the word consciousness to refer to it, but that is even a little more abstract. The way we tune into that part, the way we tune into that aspect of our own existence that does not change, is by identifying more and more with that witness consciousness, identifying more with that part of us that is actually not participating but watching. And, once when Swami Kriyananda was having a conversation with a very evolved disciple of Ramana Maharishi, he was saying, Ramana Maharishi taught this path of contemplation, of asking this question, who am I? And Swami was saying, my guru primarily focused on meditation and working with the natural energies of the body and mind. That was his path. And this evolved disciple of Ramana Maharishi, he chuckled and said, I don't quite remember the exact conversation now, but to slightly paraphrase, he said something like, all gurus teach the same, only if we could understand the essence of what it is that they're saying. And Swami Kriyananda says, I had to think about it, and then I realized, in fact, Master did teach the same philosophy. He did teach the same principle, teach the same principle of always tuning into that witness consciousness. In fact, on the path of Kriya Yoga, that is the first technique we practice. Those of you that are familiar with the techniques taught by Yoganandaji, who practice meditation in this tradition, are aware of what I'm talking about, this technique called the Hong Saw technique, which is often equated to mindfulness and many popular forms of meditation. This was not something that Yoganandaji created. It is very traditional in the Indian system, and now it is even very common across the world. What is this technique? When we observe the breath, what do? We stop participating and we start observing. Immediately, we become the witness. We start witnessing the flows of energy. We start witnessing the flow of breath itself. And by doing that, we are gaining, as Krishna is explaining here, we are gaining that true understanding of the relationship between kshetra and kshetragya, the field and the perceiver of the field. We have just a couple of minutes left today morning. Why don't we just all practice this just for a couple of minutes, although it's very brief. If I had known, I would have given more time. Let's all sit straight and completely relaxing our body, holding our spine neutral. Let's practice this technique that Yoganandaji gave us. Let's tune into the essence of this technique as it is taught by Krishna in this verse. Become aware of your breath. Become aware of its flow in your body. As the breath naturally flows into your nostrils, feel the surge of energy in your spine. Feel the breath as a flow of energy starting from the base of the spine to the spiritual eye. And again, with every exhalation, the same energy is flowing down, flowing inward. Now, for the next minute or so, let's observe this flow of breath by mentally chanting the mantra Hong Saw. With every inhalation, we'll mentally affirm and chant Hong. And with every exhalation, we will say Saw. This is an ancient Sanskrit mantra that means I am spirit, I am He. I am the witness consciousness. I am kshetragya. Become that principle. Witness and observe this flow of energy, the flow of breath. You are not the breath. You are not the flow of energy. You are not the body. You are not the mind from which thoughts arise. You are the one behind all of these, the perceiver of the field, the witness who is observing this play. Identify more and more with that aspect of yourself that is untouched and uninvolved. The breath may flow quickly, slowly, in a shallow way, in a deep way. Just observe it with curiosity, but not with any involvement or engagement with it. This relationship between our own witness consciousness and this flow of energy is the relationship between kshetra and kshetragya. And as Krishna explains in this verse, the true understanding of this relationship is the wisdom that we are seeking. So friends, we'll end our morning here, and I'll see you next week with another verse from chapter 13. Until then, God bless you all.